We're beginning a new era in the UIL 5A-6A state adjudication with the addition of the content design sheets. I think it's best that we break this sheet down in a few parts. Let's start with the content side of the box and consider the first set of descriptors. As an adjudicator, how will you offer your commentary and score ensembles in the area of effective use of all performing elements, effective visual reinforcement of music, suitability of music and visual content, frequency and demand of movement while playing, simultaneous responsibilities, and content with respect to challenge? Who'd like to answer first?
I'll go.
Okay.
One of the things that I really want to see is audio-visual coordinations. Because as an adjudicator, this will show me and tell me that there was real conversations and planning and decisions that were made to put the production together. It's not just like, maybe in the years past or the early years of marching band, where one guy did the music, one guy did the drill, one person did the color guard, and everybody just sent in their separate stuff to the director. And then the directors of that team just started to teach the show. But those conversations and those plans really didn't come together. I'll give you an example. You get to the big musical, maybe there's a big, you're in ballad, and you get to the big moment in ballad. It's the big hit, everybody's coming in, and boom, here comes the goosebump moment, and there's a strong, melodic idea, and there's a strong music phrase being performed by the entire group, percussion, horn line, front ensemble, electronics, and there's a strong visual statement that supports that. Maybe the color guard, there's a strong visual statement from the color guard. This new color that just got brought out during the hit of the ballad that we hadn't seen before. Maybe a double flag, maybe somebody on props now, maybe the props are spinning, maybe there's some body choreo to go with that. So there's some strong supporting visual reinforcement of that strong music phrase. So that shows me and tells me that there's some audio-visual coordinated moments in the production. That's what I'm looking for. And one other thing I wanted to add was, when it comes to the demand, is I would like to see, the physical demands that the students bring, the music demands they bring, maybe some of the environments where they're spread out and whatnot. How many students are involved in those types of demands? It can't just be your all-state section or the best section in the group. It's got to be the entire ensemble. And the frequency of those demands. How many times does the ensemble have magic moments like that where the demands are high? So that from those are things that I look for as an adjudicator on this sheet. Some of the things that I would like to have out there as I'm in the box upstairs.
That's great. Dan or Jodie, any comments on that?
Go ahead. You got anything?
Yeah.
All right.
For me, content and design is just a really simple concept. It still goes into simultaneous responsibility. The number one simultaneous responsibility is how you march and play your horn. And then is there just a coordination of ideas overall through the piece as Ronnie has described. And to me, it's as simple as hearing what you see and seeing what you hear. Mm-hmm. And then again, kind of like we talked in the visual ensemble sheets too, is there a priority for a primary focus on the field? Is it staged appropriately? Is it, do we put kids in a place to achieve success? Is the demand appropriate? I think this sheet really just ties in the music and visual concepts into one nice, neat package. Mm-hmm. And so when I judge that, is there a variety of elements? Are we starting with different styles of music? If we're playing different styles of music, are we playing them the right style? Do we have those musical nuances? All of that can be covered in this sheet. So it really, to me, this sheet just it leads to the objectivity of judging. It helps focus in the judge on numbers and boxes. And again, like we talked about earlier, usually if you're at the state level, you're in the consistently box already, which is the bigger box on the field, and then you strive for always. So we talked earlier about taking risk. If you do take a little bit of a risk, this is where that could pay off for you or not pay off for you. Mm-hmm. But to me, it's still about marching and playing. It's, did you get the kids in the right place? Did you get the soloist in the right place? Did you use the color guard to help bring focus? Does the color guard take a moment? Any of those things that encapsulate content and design. Is it the appropriate choice of music for the show? You know, if is it the appropriate colors for the show? If the show's Rhapsody in Blue and you use
Not blue.
not blue, tangerine and chartreuse, maybe we have a problem. Or maybe we don't. Maybe you can sell it that way.
It's ironic.
Yeah, there you go.
I think if we do, you know, a show that is taken from a ballet, you know, how are you going to treat it? Are you going to treat it as such? Is the movement going to depict that? Are you going to be able to create the imagery to connect that story to the audience, where the audience can understand, you know, if it's a highbrow type show, if it's artsy, are you going to feel something when you see it? If it's more literal, are you going to see, you know, that depiction on the field? So,
You know, people will often say that judges are just a little bit more maybe educated audience members, and I very much subscribe to that. And so I think so much of this is about, you know, audience engagement, and then leading on from there is judge engagement. And I think that these words and descriptors and what's talked about here just gives concrete ways to talk about how to engage the audience. If you have variety, you're going to have more engagement. If your pacing is appropriate, people are going to want to pay attention more. You know, if you have excellence happening at the highest level, that's the ultimate engager, right? And I mean, I moved to Texas because bands have excellence at the highest level, and that makes the audience want to pay attention, you know, and I think that's really important. So I think that this just helps ensure that if you're looking at this when you're designing your marching band show, that you're putting things into it that are going to make the audience be engaged. And in the end, that's the most rewarding thing for everybody. That's by far the most rewarding thing for students when they perform a show that they can tell the audience felt really good about when they walk off the field and throughout the show. That goes beyond any type of trophy or anything you could ever get. And this sheet gives directors and designers sort of a vehicle to help them ensure that they're doing that for their students. And that can look so different for so many different groups. And I know I mentioned this when we were talking about the brass and woodwind sheets, but this helps judges be able to compare groups that might be very different, because different isn't a bad thing. We want to get a lot of variety. We want to see a lot of groups come out with their own identities. You know, like the Reagan Band and the Johnson Band have very different identities, but
Both successful, though.
yeah, thank you for not making me say that.
I'll say it. I'm a fan of both of them.
Thank you. Yeah, but so you know, for a judge that might could be, well, how do I compare these groups? But well, now you have these things to look at. Do both groups? Am I engaged? Is the pacing appropriate? Do they have a variety of effects? Are the students carrying the artistic, you know, intent of the show throughout the show? You can do that through any vehicle and any design of a show, and I think that's amazing. And I think this just makes it so that's even more appropriate to lean into your strengths and do what you feel good about doing. But at the end of the day, for me, what we do is all about audience engagement in concert band and in marching band. And judges are in the audience, and they want to enjoy the show, and they also want to see excellence at the highest level. And to me, those two things go hand in hand.
To kind of piggyback on what you guys were talking about, you know, thinking about this in a very accessible way, the movies that resonate with all of us, believe it or not, all have these things. It's well paced, it's well acted, we've set them up, it's the scenery, it's the payoff of the soundtrack, which we all kind of are probably attracted towards if they really kind of had that moment. And that's really what we're doing. We're creating this coordinated moment visually, musically, how it's edited. You know, there's great things that are left on the editing room floor that don't make it to the field, but we have to make that choice as the quote producer. And it's that accessibility where that resonates with our audiences and with us, and then we're trying to do that on a much different kind of scale, but at least it has the exact same talking points. And that was, you know, what Ronnie was talking about earlier, I think. And then Jodie, a couple things you were talking about along the way with we see what we hear and we hear what we see. I think what it does for the state of Texas is it gives value to everyone on the field. Yep. Every person on the field now has value in what is contributed out there. It's the color guard member that really is contributing something there with like, wow, they're really contributing to the design of the show and how well it's done. It's the student running electronics. It's the student on the field. Of course, it's the soloist. It's every woodwind player on the field. And I love that now where it's not the weight is on a brass player's shoulder the whole show or something. But now everyone on the field is contributing to something which we always want to value. Now it actually gives them some point evaluation assessments and some things where we can identify and say, look, we've all did this together in a true sense here.
I always think of, for content and design, there's no right or wrong answer on this sheet. But the clarity that this sheet provides in making it more of an objective tool for a judge is why this is really valuable. But as far as what you do with your program, I think, Dan talked about this, communicating with the audience. For a while, I would say, maybe like in the early 90s, somewhere in there, we lost our way, we forgot about the audience. And it affected everything. It affected numbers, it affected football crowds, and, I just remember walking down, even in my designing era of life, I just remember being really proud of a show, and I walked down to the field, and I won't name the school or what it was, but this man stopped me and he goes, "Why did you have all that stuff on the field?" So I was like, oh, that's, ask your parents if your show makes sense. Your own
Right.
Reagan
Absolutely,
parents.
Right.
and
Having
if they
furniture
get
on the
it,
field for the sake of having furniture.
Yeah. So it has to mean something, and I think that's what this sheet leads us to, is what does it mean to the performer, to the audience, to the judge, to the average listener, because
Enhances.
they actually buy the ticket.
The other
So
day.
you want them to,
Our stakeholders, yeah.
I think too, I agree completely with what you're saying. And it could often mean something different to everybody, to the students, to the audience, to the directors. But I think it starts with the people who are designing the show. It has to mean something to them. And if that's never fully realized by people who see it, that's okay. And it took me a while to really buy into this when I was designing my own shows. Like, oh, whatever. Like, we don't. This is this part, and here's this part. Here's the ballad. Here's the closer. Here we go. But if you find deeper meaning in what you're doing, and then you can express that to students, there's just an almost intangible quality that then is communicated to the audience, and they're going to take something away from it. And I think that that's maybe a more holistic sort of thing than the exact descriptors here. But I think that kind of overarches over the descriptors on the sheet, that if you're doing that, you're probably hitting a lot of these things without even realizing it. And then you can go back and look and make sure that some of the other things are there. But if that's where you're starting, I think you will have a lot more success in the end.
We've been guilty of that. I'm talking to myself, where we say, hey, this is a non-state year, so we can do something more fun, and that, I know I've been there, and I don't know how many that are watching this now have been there, where we will take the non-state year show and try to engage the audience more so. And that shouldn't be the thinking. I don't think it should be in modern day. If you want to be competitive, we have to engage the audience. I love, Dan bringing that to life this morning. That we have to engage the audience. It's very, very important. The students that are performing in our ensembles want to walk around that school and feel like rock stars.
They're the rock stars. Yeah.
Be proud of what
be
they're
proud
doing
of what
every
they're
weekend.
doing. And there are times when our kids feel like that. In the 4 years they are in a high school, they should feel like that all 4 years, not just that 1 year you did that one really cool show.
Real special show. Yeah.
And even the cable man that was putting your cable in was talking about it at a band director's house. Hey, you're the band director. Man, y'all did that show. That was really cool. You got to engage the audience, and we got to keep that in our mind. And I think that's what this sheet leans towards, is to make sure that we don't forget about the audience. And I love your point about judges, being an audience member, maybe just know a little bit more about tonalities and brass performance.
They're more
performance,
knowledgeable.
a little bit more. But there's a lot of smart audience members too, and they're very educated, and some of them are musicians. So, it's very important that we engage the audience at all times.
I think another thing this sheet does is what it forces you to do, moving a little bit away from the adjudicator role as a designer and a teacher, what it forces you to do is prepare more up front. Because if you'll sit down and you'll organize your show, your variety of choices, how you're going to plot the pacing or the story you're going to tell, or whatever you choose to do, this makes you organize more up front, so that your show doesn't become a Band-Aid, at the end, because people in the audience are, what was that for on the field?
Right.
You've tried to take care of that up front. And so the descriptors on here, I think, will help designers, help band directors, whoever does the programming for the show, to give them a guide as to how to take care of a lot of the business before we ever put it out on the field, which I think is important for kids, because the easiest way to sell a show is to have believability of the performer. And if they don't believe what they're performing, they can't emote that to the audience. And to me, that's the most captivating part of watching a show, is the believability of the kids and the excitement of the kids, and do they like what they're doing, and are they enjoying the performance, and
you can tell
and they
absolutely.
thrive off
Yeah.
audience reaction.
Yeah, exactly.
The connection,
Yeah.
The one word that always comes to mind is, to talk about your point a little bit, when we're putting the product together, is the word intentional. We're intentionally putting this here for a reason.
Yeah.
It's not just there for the sake of it. It's a musical idea. It's why we paced it a certain way. It's why we have a certain color scheme. It's why we actually went through this. I know as a teacher and an adjudicator, it's hard. It takes time to do that. But really, you're developing the vehicle that it's going to be the most successful one. That little bit extra time, that extra hour you spend on getting the colors just right, it'll always make it, okay, that's the moment, rather than going, wow, I wish I would have changed that. I wish I would have done something there. But the word intentional, though, I think really should drive everyone's theme, and just comes back to that bottom essential question, I think.
I think that, and we've talked about this a little bit, the word role and what that means. I think sometimes people might get confused and think, oh, role means maybe one person's role, like an actor or a soloist in the show. And I think role is just wherever the focus is, that's the role that we're talking about. So if it's a brass feature, are they sustaining the role of selling that brass feature musically and visually? And is the color guard there to supplement what's going on, and all of those things? So is the role being sustained? Well, the role isn't always being played by the same people at the same time all the way through the show, but I guess number one would be, are you guiding us to where we should be paying attention, like the primary, secondary, tertiary kind of thing? Do we know where the primary focus is? And are the students that are in that primary focus role sustaining that role? Are they performing at the highest level? Are they selling it? Are they crescendoing to the end of the release? Like those little details that end up being the most massive part of what you're doing. Is that happening at a high level from start to finish? Or are there lulls? Are there times where, and that could be, maybe related to pacing, but oftentimes students might disengage a little bit, and you can feel that as a judge or as an audience member when students are not fully extending through every moment of the choreography, or, committing to the marching style, or committing musically to their fundamentals that they've learned and applying it to what they're playing. That's where I think sometimes directors are surprised that many of these things that we hold in such high regard in terms of excellence in marching and playing and choreography and guard work, that those things are what's creating the magic on the content and design sheet, right? And so that's the beauty of it, is that overlap is there. And yes, you need the vehicle, and you need to give the students something to be successful with, but they could have the most brilliantly designed thing of all time by the best designers in the world, and if there's not buy-in and there's not a high level of achievement there, then they're not sustaining their role, and we're not seeing that come across clearly, and you can't give credit on the right side of that sheet if that's happening.
And I want to piggyback on that. Dan said the word excellence, and that's exactly what I'm looking for when I'm judging, is I want the excellence to come to life in the performance. That's huge. And you touched on all those great points, but excellence is a huge thing on this side of the sheet. And what kind of excellence are we talking about? Every kind of excellence. Whatever you're asking your performers to do musically or visually, or the color guard members, the electronics, whatever element of the production, you want excellence to be brought to life. It's got to be state-of-the-art sounds from the electronics, the fidelity great, state-of-the-art movement from what you're asking the color guard to do, the body choreo, state-of-the-art everything. So you want the excellence to come to life, to give credit here on the sheet. Another thing really quick that I want to touch on is, again, do not get away from the audience. This is a huge thing. We have to have moments in the productions to allow the audience to react. And I think that a lot of us have seen shows, or we've seen hundreds and hundreds of band shows through our years, and where there are bands that forget about this, and they don't allow the audience to, to react, to clap.
Yeah, yeah.
Do I clap? Wait a minute. Well, they didn't bring their instruments down.
Right.
They played a beautiful, sonorous G major chord with a horn line out there. G major, but it was
There's
only.
so many problems with that.
But
Wow, why would you do that? But go ahead.
well, let's just, it was perfectly in tune. The top, the bottom, the
appreciate
third,
it.
everything was there. The fifth, it was a beautiful sounding G major chord, but it was only 3 counts. And it was at quarter note equals 160. And then you went on to something else. Instead of a G major chord could be just glorious
Yeah.
out there from the ensemble. But, give the audience a chance to react to that. Hold it out 7 counts or 9 counts or 11.
Let it breathe.
Let it breathe.
breathe.
And then, let the audience
And-
hold on to that chord, give them a moment to react to it.
And those seconds that you do are probably more valuable than anything you could have crammed in with 8 more counts of choreo or
Absolutely.
whatever.
Absolutely.
You get more bang for your buck.
And I think that when it comes to moments like that in production, sometimes we fall a little bit short. Here comes your big ta-da moment, and ta-da, and you moved on to something really quick. And you didn't let the audience savor that moment
Right.
or react to it. And so I think that's also very important on this, here on this descriptor on the
Great.
sheet.
I think there's different ways to, one, sustain a role or communicate musical roles to the audience, because not everything has to be loud. You can draw people in just as well with a single person, a single voice in the ensemble, even a down roll. I mean, if a person sits on the edge of their seat and they want more, that's still communication with the audience. So I think that goes back to variety.
Yes.
I also think that the way that you communicate to the audience with your performers and what you're asking them to do becomes really important, because if they're not comfortable on the field, they're not going to be able to sell it. And so comfortability in how they do what they do. And so that goes back to where we kind of talked about earlier. Hopefully the sheet will guide that process, so you're not giving them, you're not the Blue Devils, and so you shouldn't maybe put a snare drummer on a 20-foot ladder and try to
Right,
play,
right.
So,
You be you.
yeah.
Yeah.
You do what's best for you, and I think that's what we need to remember in this sheet. It's not necessarily, it's about your choices, but it's about your appropriateness of choices for your group.
I think we can train our students in anything they feel comfortable with. We see on the sheet, it talks about sustaining the role, but the word compelling. Are you compelling? And that doesn't mean it has to be just overly acted, for instance, but if I'm playing a musical phrase or visually portraying a phrase, do I come across as just like, wow, I really believe what they're saying, like you use the word believability. And then being able to sustain that, you see initiation a lot of times where they can initiate a phrase, and over the course of time or the course of the show arc, they're getting tired, or mentally they're checking out, and an audience kind of catches that. Adjudicators, we check that, and I think that we're trying to get that going. The word compelling, I love that word a lot. Are you compelling? Does it come across as here's the emotion that's visceral, and we all have that, or it's the subtlety of it. Does it come across as a very compelling moment? It's how we handle it with some other words that are on the sheet here, and I always kind of come back to those words, and it sometimes helps me make the decision as a judge. Okay,
Yeah.
that's the difference maker with that one word, for instance.
And I think another key on this sheet, which I think is pretty much on all of them, again, we'll hit, is professionalism.
Yes, yeah.
Because to me, the more the students are comfortable with the product, the more that professionalism just exudes from each performer. Again, how they walk on the field, how they present themselves to the audience. It's easier to do that if you're able to achieve what you've been given.
Yeah.
Regardless of what that is. It can be anything you want it to be.
Right.
It's your show.
I do want to talk about the words are still on the achievement level. These are the scarier words, the ones that are more subjective, and I think adjudicators, we need to know this, and especially if you're a director trying to learn from this, I think these are the ones that are like, how in the world do I really study this? The words of artistry, nuance, involvement, and professionalism. All of you have been very successful in these areas as teachers and designers and be able to evaluate it and assess it at certain levels as adjudicators. So is there one or two words that really kind of say, okay, I kind of think professionalism, like Joe, you kind of hit it on a while ago, the show getting better is a byproduct and help the professionalism kind of attributes to that. But artistry, for instance, how does that something where you go, that band has artistry? on the field.
I mean, I
What
think
does that
it's
mean to you?
the difference between a wind player who has choreography, for example. It's the difference between them sort of hitting the checkpoints and going through the motions and fully extending through every count and really showing that they understand the intent behind what they're doing and that they're performing it, not just doing it.
Right.
And I think part of that is going to come from the designer because they need to give them something appropriate that they can make that happen. But then the true artistry comes through the student. And again, as an audience member, you can tell that. You can tell when that's prevalent in the ensemble, and you can tell when we're going to now, do the stock, stick our foot out, twist it to the right, put our feet back in, and then go.
Do some band body.
Yeah. So there's a difference between that and then there being movement that actually enhances the music, and then the layer that's really important on top of that is that the movement is being sold, and that believability aspect to that. So I think with artistry, to me, that's kind of where you see that. And I know that word feels nebulous, but I think if you start to really break it down, you can get some concrete things out of it that you can latch onto.
Well, for me, this whole, the descriptor side, these artistry, nuance, involvement, professionalism, for me, simply state of the art. You want everything to be state of the art. The electronic sound, the fidelity of sound, the clarity of sound, the balance, the blend from the ensemble, what the performers are being asked to do if they're playing, that beautiful lyrical moment, and they're doing body choreo. Does the choreo match, the lyricism of what they're performing, or does it not? You brought up a very good point, because some people will have these stock, choreo moments where they just kind of throw 8 counts at the performer, 16 counts, but it's not state of the art. It has nothing to do with what they're doing musically, and vice versa. So everything state of the art for me is how I see these descriptors is, the excellence coming to life, and everything that they're being asked to do is it's state of the art. It's not, the prop, and I've been there, I'm talking to myself, but is the prop a state of the art prop, or is it not a state of the art prop?
Right.
I mean,
Or do we need a prop?
or do we need a prop?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, whatever you're going to put out there, it's got to be state of the art.
Jodie, anything with those words?
I'm just going to use Dan and myself for just a second, just because we're both sitting here, and I want to share something that I think is really important. When I go back and I think of those iconic shows that I want to see over and over and over, I can always describe instantly the moments that I think are the most spectacular.
Right.
And for me, it's maybe different than what Ronnie sees or what you see or what Dan sees. And so if I go back and I think of A Secret Garden, is that the
Secret World?
Secret World?
Yeah.
Secret World. There's 2 things that immediately jump out to me. And I'm going to be really honest, I'm not trying to not sell what we do, but a lot of this stuff happens on accident.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so,
We get lucky. We all
yeah,
get lucky.
like we think we're the brains behind this, but then we're like, oh, that's working really well. Everybody
Yeah.
likes it. Let's go ahead
That's
and
right,
expand that. So, but with his show, what I remember, there's 2 things I really remember. When all of a sudden they picked up the flags and ran around the field,
Yeah.
it was just so special. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, was this bass clarinet player sitting on the drum major podium. And I just thought those were like really 2 cool moments. And when I go back and I talk about The Lion King, which was the same year?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Secret
yeah.
World? Everybody talks about those 2 kids having a dialogue on the field, the 2 lions having the trombone player and the saxophone player. And, that wasn't in the original
Right.
forethought of the show. It
Yeah.
came later. But what makes that moment so memorable and special for so many people is the way those kids sold it. Because
Yeah,
those
sure.
kids
Absolutely.
performed.
Yeah.
Even the little bass clarinet player, I think what was so astounding to me is that he was just sitting there, his legs were shaking back and forth while he was playing. Right? Do I have that right?
We had bass clarinet duet, solo, yeah.
So somebody was on the drum major. I just thought it was cool.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just
It
think
was memorable.
it can be one kid. It
Yeah.
can be an accident. It can
Yeah,
be,
absolutely. But if it works,
Yeah,
go,
go
with
with
it.
It's a fluid process, and things just kind of evolve out of that.
Yeah. And that's okay with this sheet.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
agree. I think the word motivation helps out, and I can think of professionalism. I'm of course adjudicating the show in action, but you alluded to this. When they walk on the field, they have it. And the one thing we struggle with sometimes, let's talk about the visual aspect of it. There's a flag change that has to happen, equipment change. The motivation for the performer to come to the sideline, are they suddenly walking? Like, I can still see you, hello, I still see you walking over.
Yeah.
Or is there a ripple, a contagion that all of a sudden takes them and it motivates them to get to the sideline, and then maybe they ripple back
perform
up.
the entire way to the sideline,
they're
too.
performing, yeah. And then, to me, it's like, that's professionalism.
Yeah.
Or better
you've thought
yet,
about it.
you don't even notice that
Yeah.
they
Exactly.
Right,
Like,
yeah.
how did you
Then you're
come up
really
with that
onto
new
something.
flag in your
Yes.
hand?
Yeah.
And like Ronnie alluded to that, there's a moment, there's a moment like an aha moment, it's a different color, and like, that's professionalism. So you're looking for that. When you go to a Broadway theatrical production, you don't notice them suddenly break out of character if they get out of the way of the curtain.
Right.
I mean, they'd be fired probably. But on the same top, it's the level of detail. It's just crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. And so that really comes to my mind, the motivation of everything you're doing, musically, how you're handing phrases to someone, how you're choosing to
Yeah.
get that soloist up there, and are they in character? Because you're wanting to look over there. It's like, you're wanting me to look there, but they're kind of not really, they're fiddling with a microphone, or they're kind of turning around, emptying the spit out of their horn, which they all have to do, but can it be a part of the choreography? Can it be a part of the arrangement?
Little things are big things.
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
that's
And they sure
so
add
true.
up.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that we try to do as a designer is, and I don't want to forget about this because this to me goes with the fluidity and pacing of the show, is how do you fluidity and pacing of the show is how do you get from point A to point B? Is it always,
Yeah.
if it's a transitional moment, is it always the same kind of transition? Is it always carried by the front ensemble and electronics? I mean, no, it can't do that anymore. You know, even with transitions, you have to have a variety of different ways to get from point A to point B. And I think sometimes I don't want anyone to read these new sheets and get trapped, kind of like we had talked about yesterday, we visited a little bit, that you have to have a gratuitous woodwind moment, you have to have the gratuitous brass moment to make this work.
Right.
This one should say it's more about the flow, and if it's in context of the show.
I mean, I guess I touched on this a little bit earlier with our other session, but I think that the fairest thing to do for everybody is just be completely honest in your feedback and in your verbal commentary throughout the show, and knowing that these are descriptors that you should be using and apply them appropriately based on the level of the group, and then thinking back to how frequently was I using words in certain sort of areas? How frequently did I say usually or consistently or always, or a word that very closely is related to these words, you know? And then that's how you get into a neighborhood, and then you start to think, well, are they in the middle of that neighborhood? Are they kind of at the bottom? Or are they at the top of it? And then you just keep getting more and more specific. But I just think it's an important point to make to everybody that judges are not coming up with a score in their head and then trying to have feedback that matches their score.
No.
You're watching the show from beginning to end and reacting to everything you see. It may be an amazing first 3 minutes, and then it might fall off a lot after that. And so you might have a lot of always that then transition into a lot of sometimes. And you have to sort of bridge the gap between those things. But it's not like a band comes out for the first 30 seconds and you've decided exactly where they're going to go
Right.
on this
Slaughtered them,
spectrum.
basically.
Yeah, no, and no judge I've ever talked to approaches things like that. I think as directors, we can sometimes come up with stories about how things are going or who the person judging us or this and that.
Right.
Everyone that's judging wants to do the best job possible and wants to give appropriate feedback and be as fair as they possibly can and put everybody where they deserve to be, you know? And I truly 100% believe that. And so anyway, I think it's important that you are being honest with your feedback, you're being honest with your written feedback, and you use all of that to guide you to where on this sheet did my feedback place this group. And so the group is putting themselves there essentially through.
They're telling the story.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's at least a great place to start with it.
And I like the fact that you mentioned through the performance, because it's got to be through time.
Yes.
From start to finish. That we are making these decisions where we're going to put our groups. I love these descriptors because it puts the groups in neighborhoods that we've talked about during this, session today. And it forces judges to dig deep and reward achievement. And this is very important. These sheets are meant for San Antonio in November. Will they expand from that? Probably yes.
Right.
We'll see these, later, earlier through the years. So, but this sheet is very important because as an adjudicator, you're reacting to a group in November in San Antonio at the Alamo Dome. No one should be in those first few boxes, the first one, the second one. I mean, so you have numbers ever gone there in the past? Maybe so. I mean, we could, look at the past sheets, but it has the judges make crucial decisions on rewarding the achievements that are happening that moment with that team. And the judge has to dig deep, and that's what they need to do. This is not a time for, to take a bite out of a donut or check their, their email during that team. It forces a person that is reacting to teams that is going to give a legitimate number and ranking to a team to dig deep and find those descriptors and put those groups in the neighborhoods. And what I like to do in each of those boxes is, again, just divide it in three. There's a lower, there's a mid, and there's a high in that one box area, so that you can put teams accordingly and keep track of that.
Right.
And again, it's 500 points inside these boxes. So someone needs to decide, or you need to decide for yourself, or how it's going to work as we start to use these sheets through the years. How many points apart really has the teams where it could go either way?
Does he need to say that again? Because it's 100 points on each side.
Yeah, you
Right?
can.
Yeah. This one's got a different point total.
Oh, it's different. Okay.
Yeah, so 100 points on it's 200 points total on this sheet.
Oh, it's 200 points.
For this sheet.
Okay,
You were
so-
right on the other sheet.
Okay, so it's 200 points. Okay. So this sheet has a total of 200 points. So as an adjudicator, we need to decide how many points will it be where the teams could go either way? Where, is it within 10 points, anywhere in that 10-point, neighborhood where the teams could go either way, or is it 20, what it is. But I think I really like this because the descriptors help as a rubric for the judges to put teams where they need to be accordingly.
I think, just in general, for judging at this level too, that now that the sheets are somewhat delineated from where you start, at your region level, we all go through pretty intensive training at the drum corps level, and then there's always time for feedback and reflection, and either, judges have to be held accountable too. There's a lot
Agreed.
we get rated in drum corps, they either like you or they don't. It usually depends on your number.
Right.
Right. What I do find appreciative at the end of the year, and what I hope that we will be able to do here as well, is kind of make these fluid. If we see something is not working, because I think in Texas, what's so hard is that if I look at drum corps now, like what they're asking kids to do in drum corps, I could have never done it. I mean, it's
Same
so
as me.
far evolved from where we started. And, we talked earlier too about marching band was ranks and files. I mean, it stemmed from military and existence, and so cover downs and so forth and so on. So I think the fluidity of the sheets, the evolvement of the sheets have all, created a better structure for getting them in the right box and then getting them in the right part of the box. And then feedback too from year to year, I think will help. And
Yes.
and I need to know, also,
Right.
am I, did I do well
By doing it
for
justice.
yeah, for the sheet and for the program.
Right.
So this helps hold the judge accountable to a degree. So numbers management is never easy,
No, you have to definitely work towards it.
especially when all the bands are good, because at this
Oh, it's
level,
hard.
they're all good.
I think one thing where I think everyone will find hopefully helpful, not only with the content and design sheet, but in all of them, there is a backside to the sheet, and there are essential questions on each one of those. I've learned this through drum corps. Start with the back of the sheet and actually judge from that, and it'll actually help guide you a lot more. A lot of times I find myself looking at those, there's essential questions there. To what degree are they delivering and sustaining their roles? Is the continuity and flow and pacing, to what degree is it happening? Is it always happening, or is it sometimes right, or is it sometimes broken up? And so it takes each of these descriptors and puts them in a little question, and so suddenly things kind of pop off the page at you, and it really, really has helped me. So I know, especially in content design, which is one of the more challenging ones to be able to judge, each of these sheets have these on the back, and we've kind of broken them down, and I think that hopefully the adjudication panels will find that to be pretty helpful. Going especially into, this will be in some other topics we have in our webinar, but about how the boxes are divided down, and Ronnie, you talked about this a little bit. It's broken down into thirds. There's kind of the emergence into the box. Let's say if it's someone is going from the usually to the consistently box, they are just entering into it. They are sort of being more consistent. They are consistent to most degree, and there's ever so often they're kind of not, so they're in the usually, all the way to the other ones of like somebody knocking on the door of like, they are almost always there. They are consistently doing it, and they're one step away from like everything being there. And that is the visual program or the visual pacing of the show, and then all the way to the how, where the students are, they're sustaining their role always, or they're sustaining their role, they're almost there, so they're on that end of the box. It'll kind of give you places to put things, not that people can't move around, but then it starts, to me, it helps me breathe easier, where I'm not just like, oh no, they're in here somewhere, where do I put them? But yet I can actually put them in a place where I think this is the neighborhood, is generally the word we like to use, where they're living in this neighborhood, and we want to promote you to the next bigger neighborhood. We want you to go to the next bigger set of houses. Like, come on, convince me as the show kind of progresses here. So I think it helps us out.
I think, that being said, this is the one sheet that allows a judge to watch the show from beginning to end and just react to what they see.
Yep.
Like, I'll go back to Secret World again. I mean, you were constantly on the edge of your seat because the show evolved through time musically and visually, and you were always looking for that next thing to happen. It was very well crafted. And this allows you to react to that, and still give you guidance on always or usually or consistently or rarely, which we hope we don't see at state.
Exactly, especially at the state level, yeah. One last thing about this that was great advice to me that I definitely like to give to everyone when judging from a content design sheet as opposed to an analysis sheet. I was digging really deep in analysis, and I was going for this, and the best advice someone gave me was let the show come to you. Take it in as audience member. Take it in as you have your box of popcorn, and you're just kind of sitting there and going, you're enjoying this, and you are kind of understanding, you are evaluating this, but were you affected by this as a person? Did that make sense, or did you want more? Were you lacking more? Or like, wow, that was exactly the color I thought they were going to come out with. And then that's the perfect end to the storyline. Or it's an abstract idea of like, they kept the theme going the whole time. I noticed, look, there's triangles everywhere, and look, there's the music's in 3/4 time, and you're just kind of enjoying it and you're taking it in. I had to learn to do that, so I definitely wanted to give that same helpful advice to whoever was judging this. Let it come to you in this level, and once I learned to do it from that viewpoint, it definitely made it a lot easier to receive it rather than I'm going to go after it and start trying to attack it a little bit as a judge. So, the
ability to react to what you see on the field is so important because it goes back to the audience. That's what the audience does.
Yeah, exactly. In many ways, you are the most educated person in the audience, and then you have to be able to be affected towards that and love or hate it. So, all right, let's move on to another topic here. Let's shift the focus to look at the same content design sheet through the lens of teachers and designers. How do you ensure that the show you're creating for your ensemble will have the content, will serve as the best vehicle to maximize this box in San Antonio in November?
I'll start off, and I'll just say that no disrespect to the show in San Antonio, but this is what I want out of every show, every
all the
performance.
Time, yeah.
Friday Night Lights especially.
Yeah.
And this is what I would tell my students. Every time you perform, there's going to be at least one person in that audience, maybe 10, maybe 1,000, who knows, but that has never seen the group, never heard of the group, doesn't know anything about the group. So you always want to capture those performances every time. So these, the moments we're talking about and the point that you bring, as a teacher, designer, how we want to ensure that these types of performances are happening should be all the time and lead to San Antonio. But you've got to plan early. You've got to get people to make this happen. You got to plan early. I think Jodie brought this up. You've got to get people on the team that have eyes, that have ears for these types of things that are needed to put into a show. And if there's nobody on the staff, surely there is, but if there's not, then that's okay too. Then get somebody on the team that can do that.
Sure.
Study performances. And when I say study performances, I don't mean just marching band. Go to YouTube and watch marching bands, or just go to YouTube and watch drum corps. I mean all performances. You brought up music theater. That's a great way to kind of connect the dots in your mind as a teacher, as a designer, on what makes this so attractive.
The why.
The why, why am I cheering? Why am I getting goosebumps? Why am I tearing up, every 5-8 minutes or whatnot in a music theater show? The same types of concepts can be brought to a marching show. So it's very important to study, and not just band, but to be an appreciator of all performing arts. I mean, I can watch a commercial and get an idea out of a commercial.
Yeah.
Man, that needs to be in a band show.
To give you a feeling.
To give you a feeling. So it's very important that we study, that we're open-minded, that we're, lifelong learners that are still appreciating other performances and all types of venues. They're all related. So you can grab like a big musical moment from a symphony orchestra performance and remember that and say that, that needs to be, that moment right there meant something to me as I'm sitting here enjoying this symphony orchestra. How do I put that in a band show? Or how do I bring that to life in a band show? Or if you've ever seen the Count Basie Orchestra,
Right.
One of the greatest, big bands in the history of the world. Well, have you ever heard them live? They'll go from a double forte to a piano, 20 times. I've never heard a group play that soft before. And each time they would lower it one dynamic.
Right.
And the audience was going nuts.
But the quality was there.
The quality was there. It
Yeah.
was state-of-the-art tone qualities and tonalities and professionalism. Or a child, the cute factor of a child singing the last note in a school play or in a music theater production or, somewhere. Just that little cute factor, that 5-year-old singing that note perfectly in tune. Taking all those types of elements and putting them into a production. So I think that, yes, you want this in November, but you want to try to do this all the time for your audiences, even Friday Night Lights.
Yeah, I think that you make a great point about finding things that you react to, but then taking it a step further and trying to figure out why you're reacting to it. Because if you can figure that out, then you can sort of bottle that up and start to use it for your own stuff.
Right.
And that can be special. And just directly for marching band, when I first, became the head director at Reagan, I knew I wanted to help put the shows together. It was something I was really excited about and wanted to do. I didn't have a ton of experience doing it, but I literally would watch the shows that I knew I loved. And I would find the moments in there specifically that I really loved and said, let's create something like this. Like it's, you don't have to, I think people think for content and design or whatever you want to call it, that you have to like reinvent the wheel and do something never seen by human eyes. And that's a lot of pressure to try to do that. And maybe sometimes you'll get lucky and somehow do that once in a while, but mostly you're finding inspiration from things and maybe making it your own a little bit. But find the shows that you love and figure out why you love them, and then try to create some of that magic in your own production and pick and choose from shows over the years. And that's a great way to start. And then from there, you'll find your own voice and your own style, and it'll start to evolve. But if you're starting out and you don't have maybe a bunch of people on your team or a big design team, and a lot of it falls on your shoulders, you can do it. I know for 100% fact. You might say, I'm bad at that. No, you're not. If you like something and you know why you like it, then you can figure it out from there. And you can start to put together really special productions.
Along with what Dan just said, a lot of people will come and they'll say, oh, we want to do something like so did, And my response always is the same. If I go and tell my hairdresser I want to look I want the same haircut as Jennifer Aniston, it doesn't mean I'm going to look like Jennifer Aniston.
Right.
So I think finding those things that you do like, you figure out why you like them, and you have to make them your own.
Yeah.
And make them appropriate for where your group is and their level of achievement, because, like I said, the snare drummer on the 20-foot ladder might not be appropriate,
Right.
So,
There's a caveat to what I said. Don't be unreasonable about what you're trying to ask people, but find inspiration.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm never going to look like Jennifer Aniston.
But I have the haircut, though.
Yeah.
Neither will I.
Yeah, that's right. One thing, especially as a teacher and also someone who helps still design my own shows, there's this fine line where you give the resolution, you get the payoff, versus something being predictable. And I guess it's my adjudicator hat I wear sometimes. I always like, oh, here it is. Oh, yeah, you gave me exactly what I thought. Give me a little surprise. It's the state of the art. Give me some little innovation. Take the group that you really, you love this and figure out why you loved it, but put your own signature on it. Put your twist on it where it still gives me the payoff and the resolution, but the predictability of it also didn't come across as, it's kind of a little bit of a letdown. And see if you can find that next little area to own and make it your own signature.
And just to clarify, too, it's still all about how you march and play your instrument.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And if that excellence can't be achieved at the highest level, the rest of it does not matter.
Right.
So that's always the first priority. And
Invest your money in that
Yeah.
if you're going to invest your money in anything.
Yeah.
So just to react to Jodie's point really quick, and that, for the content and design being so important, and, we're talking shop with this sheet, but, how the students are playing their instruments and how they're moving and how they're performing and what we're asking them to do is very important and the most important, probably for every adjudicator upstairs or, downstairs, wherever they're reacting to, because sometimes schools are so excited and teams are so excited to try to build on the content and design part of their program that they may accidentally forget about performing, how the kids are performing their instruments and how they're moving, because uniformity has to be present. Judges love when students do things alike, playing and moving. So I just wanted to kind of piggyback on Jodie's point with that.
yeah, clean is a part of content and design.
Right. I think everyone respects that.
Yeah.
I think adjudicators will probably find this helpful. I know the band directors we're talking to will find this extremely helpful. What tips would you give in a rehearsal setting? Like, let's look at the right side of the sheet, the achievement level. We talked about deliver and sustaining roles, artistry, nuance, connection with the audience, the communication. What are some ways you've rehearsed that? Like, what are some hidden secrets, or like, hey, we value this and we want to invest this much time to treat that in a rehearsal setting so the students can be successful in a performance? Do you want to have any insight?
I think there has to be a baseline understanding that even when we're rehearsing and even early on, this needs to feel like a performance as much as possible. And you have to use your imagination a little bit, but I am always talking about, pretend like there's an audience behind me and you're trying to communicate, or I'm the audience and you're communicating the show to me right now. If you're not, I think people think they can paste that stuff on right before the contest. It's like we gotta get our nuts and bolts. All right, now we're gonna perform it. Now we're gonna pay attention to there being an audience. Now we're gonna try and communicate.
Yes.
And the more years that I've done this, the earlier on in the season I talk about it, to the point now it's like we just put the drill in the field and I'm already planting that seed. Obviously we got to get little Johnny freshman from point A to point B a few more times before he can think about anything else. But you're at least planting the seed, because it has to be a part of what the students are doing and as important to them as every other aspect of what they're doing. And you can't get that unless it's a very relevant part of rehearsal consistently and from the beginning of the season. And so I think that's the biggest thing. That's not necessarily like a magic rehearsal technique. I don't know if you'd call it a technique as much as it is something that you just make important and something that you talk about and that you value. Because like I said earlier, that the audience engagement is why we do what we do. It's what makes it special. It's what sets it apart for math class, you know? And to truly engage the audience at the highest level, that students have to know about that. I feel like sometimes directors think it's like, should be a secret. It's like, go out there and do your show really well. But that doesn't get to that next level
Don't embarrass me.
of artistry, but of artistry and professionalism, all those things we were talking about earlier that seem sort of like, well, what is that? It's this, you know, it's ingraining that in every rehearsal as often as you can, along with all the fundamentals and all of the techniques that we have to be great band directors.
Yeah, so one of my mentors said this to me years and years ago, and I'll never forget this. Whatever happens in the classroom or on the marching field is our fault. Good or bad, whatever happens,
That's right.
we're giving permission for that student.
Right.
We're allowing them to do so. So it's very important, and to Dan's point, is we have to set up our students for success. We mentioned this in our earlier session, but having the ensemble warm up all at the same time early season is probably not the best idea.
Right.
The brass team does need, a different type of warm up and sound production, tone production, than the woodwind team. Then the drum line, then the color guard, then the front ensemble. So it's very important that there are people in place and and there are objectives in place so that students are getting those daily things to make them better performers. Very important that we set up our students for success in the development before they start to perform the production, because their fundamentals or lack of fundamentals are going to kick in the production. So if we didn't set them up for success early on, we can expect that as directors for them to be performing at a high level, or to be able to move with more excellence, or to play this with a better sonority of sound, because we didn't really set them up at the beginning. And we can never let go, we can never abandon our fundamentals and our fundamental teaching throughout the season. Does it get less with the amount of time you're giving to those things? Absolutely. You're giving more time to the production and so forth. But you have to touch on those. Band is a do-it-again activity.
Yes, it is.
So you've got to do it again, do it again, do it again. And but excellence is very, very important, and we should be expecting that in a timely manner, not all at once, but in a timely manner from our students every single rehearsal.
I think, just for me, tips I've learned along the way, I've been blessed to be around fantastic designers and creators and theater people and costuming people, and some things I've learned, just simple things too, like, why does Jarrett crawl on top of the building to run a rehearsal? Well, it's to project up, because where does your audience sit? They don't sit right here, they sit way back there. And I keep hearing the word performer. Well, what does a performer do? You kind of, is a 14-year-old kid going to be as comfortable as performing as a senior? No, the answer is they're not, because this is a whole new thing for them. And how do you get them out of that comfort zone? And sometimes, for me, like when you talk to people who've done musical theater, they may be playing a role that is not their personality at all.
Right.
But they've had to do an acting exercise to get that believability for that role before they ever put it on the field. I don't think there's anything wrong with acting exercises. I've worked with groups who have done an acting exercise for each part of the show.
Like across the floors kind of a thing.
Well, not even across the floors, just walk up to Ronnie as he walks through the band hall and show him sad, and I'm going to show you happy, and because that's really important when it becomes believability. And the groups that are in the always box, they have that believability, and you know who I'm talking about, because you know the groups that do it really well, because they do it over and over and over and over again. And anywhere in the country, you can think of who those groups are. I think another thing, it's hard to see a band member's face, because of the shako. So little things you can do is work with your color guard or your dance company or whatever it is every day to exude the emotion of that particular moment of the show. If they're young, put some makeup on them.
Yeah.
If they're real young, put a mask on.
That's right.
There's just so many things you can do. Just if you're in the younger stage of development, there's so many things steps you have to take to get to that always box. And even at Johnson, it did not come here easily until I would say, Chameleon was the first show that really checked all the boxes for us. And but that was 5 or 6 years maybe into the opening of the school.
Right.
But what we were able to do was train those kids year after year after year after year. And the beauty of that is when you get great leadership going in your program, those kids will train the new kids. And if they see the older kids doing it, that's who they want to emulate. And so some of that takes care of itself.
Yeah.
So I think just developing, how do you get yourself out of your comfort zone? Little tricks of the trade.
Sure.
Give them a little more black eyeliner.
Bigger mask.
Yeah.
And I have a personal anecdote here, but in 2018, we chose at Keller High School a show entitled Fearless. And we knew by choosing that, we've got to come across as being fearless. It's like, act fearlessly right now. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And we knew early on, by choosing this abstract concept, we really had to do a lot of investment. We should have done it all along anyway in other shows. Someone had kind of said, well, give them this idea. Let them only focus on 2 people in the audience. And your job is to connect to those 2 people the whole time. And even in practice, we would say, what does your person look like? Well, it's a guy wearing a blue hat, or it's a young lady sitting there, or someone it's my mom in the audience wearing a band shirt. We're trying to give them something to kind of latch on to, so they're trying to get confident with their performance with the counts and trying to make sure they're playing the right notes and rhythms and moving, but they also are connecting. I'm happy at this moment, I'm intense at this moment, I'm coming across as being confident in this moment, and I'm trying to, wherever I am on the field, I'm trying to really connect with that person each time. I think for the most part, several students really became a little bit more comfortable with that. And of course, were we perfect? By no means we were, but you can tell the students at least kind of came across with this unified theme, and it meant something to them. It was personalized where they could see that person, but yet it still had the same umbrella of the idea of trying to be fearless. And I think we'll continue that on even with other shows of just who is it, and start that as early in the process as you can. And it's how you step on the field, from how you're standing, the professionalism we've been discussing, to how I'm playing the last note of the show. I'm trying to come across with this idea, and I want this communication to be happening for 8 solid minutes, if I can make it happen.
Yeah, and you know what? You have to get out of the trap of a pre-show. I want to spend a second to talk about that, because sometimes with content design, you think you need this elaborate pre-show, and I think we got stuck in that trap of doing an elaborate pre-show. At first it started 1 minute before, then 2 minutes before, and then it's in the tunnel, and then it moves to the parking lot. And so it's really, if you're going to do a pre-show, the only thing that it's good for is setting the tone for the production. And it gives the kids, even if you give them one last acting skill on the way that they walk out onto the field with what they hear, whether it's sound effects or music or whatever, it's not being judged, but it allows them to come out with a sense of comfort. It's the same reason, play a little bit, before you start.
Yeah.
It's just go look at someone. And, I remember just when emotional content started to show up on all of the sheets that we were doing it for drum corps or whatever, the big thing for a little while was who was the color guard member that was going to go attack the judge on the field and just look at him. And you think it's funny, but, it works. And what do little freshmen do when they come in for the first time? They giggle, because that's, they're nervous, and that's what they go to, their go-to emotion. So pick something up that makes them giggle, and it's okay to laugh, know. But then also go to the extreme end and make them angry. Yeah. And so they know what the difference is. And then that's what they have to remember. I mean, there is a way that you walk onto the field fearlessly. So, and there's a way that you walk onto the field scared. Yes. And we can pick that up, when we judge. So just, I think with pre-show, my 2 cents on that is just set the tone for the production. Right.
We've talked about several of these ideas. Is there any additional thoughts from any of you about any of these other subjects earlier on you'd like to reiterate?
Well, for me, again, just if I can, like the whole thing, this content and design sheet, for me, and I think this has to do with me, my little ADD thing that I may have had. I don't know, I've never been diagnosed, but I feel that I was never a strong reader because I would get bored. I'd start reading a paragraph or two, and then all of a sudden, I'm looking at that bird out the window, or I'm listening to somebody walk down the hall. So for me, it's a blessing and it's a curse.
Right.
So for this content and design sheet, I want to see new ideas, new layers. I don't want the same thing over and over. I want new ideas, new layers. They have to be state of the art though. State of the art sounds, state of the art movement. I mean, there's nothing wrong with playing symphonic literature, some of the classic literature, or playing a pop tune or something from U2 or whatnot, but it can't be the first 3 minutes of a major symphony orchestra. That 3 minutes takes too long to develop. It's meant for, the concert hall and whatnot. This is an 8-minute band show outside, it's okay to play excerpts and to maybe interpret the way you're going to play it in some, creative, imaginative way. But that's how I see this sheet is how kind of the overall sheet means to me.
For me, the biggest thing is what I started with is just with communicating with the audience. And I think the first football game has kind of turned into a litmus test for us. I think a lot of band directors, and I at least used to sort of write off the football crowd and like, well, this isn't important. We don't want to do this.
They're not paying attention to us.
They're not paying attention to you, but if you can make them pay attention to you, then you are really onto something. And I truly, truly believe that. It also makes the season so much more fun.
Right.
If you're doing something that you know that is going to get a reaction out of a football crowd, then the kids suddenly are like, this is cool. I like doing this. I like coming to the football games every Friday. Like, it's something you have to do, but then it becomes something you want to do. And chances are, if you're getting the attention of people that would rather just be like eating their halftime hot dog or whatever, and suddenly they're looking up and paying attention to the band that they've never paid attention to in their lives, and they're standing at the end of the show, that's probably going to translate competitively in some way. I mean, more likely than not likely that it's going to. So I think it's important to pay attention to how that is being perceived and responded to at football games and anything like that.
No,
Absolutely.
Oh, let's go get a Coke.
Yeah, make them not like regret that they left, you know?
Right.
I just, for all the sheets for me, this the number one strive is still excellence of marching and playing your instrument. Simultaneous responsibility comes across all the sheets. It's still marching and playing your instrument, and professionalism and communication and all those things. To me, my hope is that this just gives you a tool to judge objectively and to be able to separate those programs at the top, at state, according to the rubrics we've now been given that you guys have worked so hard on. So.
Anything else you think we need to cover? Yeah.
Cool.
Good.